Welcome, everybody, to another conversation as part of the Illumination Project of the Springfield History Museum. My name's Thomas Hura. I'm the story collector for 2022-23, and I'm co-leading this project with my amazing partners, Melissa Noliedo, who is our photographer, and Amy Yogi, who is our consultant for the project. We are all very blessed right now to have with us Melissa Cariño. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Good to be with you here in Springfield. The opportunity to talk about Asian identity in Springfield is an exciting one.
Yes, indeed.
So the fact that you're willing to jump on board, I know that you have recently worked for 4 years in the planning department of the city of Springfield, and that you continue to be involved with SAFER, Springfield Alliance for Equity and Respect. So we're going to have a great conversation. But I do want to just try to get to your origin story and your background. So Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let's go way back. 44 years ago, I was born in San Francisco. My parents were young immigrants from the Philippines, and I was the second of two children and grew up mostly in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. But by the time I was in third grade, my parents decided to move us to the San Joaquin Valley, which is the rural kind of farming community in Central California. And the demographics were very, very, very different, where I was surrounded by a lot of brown folks growing up, and I was surrounded by a lot of white folks when I went to school it was Ripon, California. And so I was there for third grade through eighth grade, and then I hurried back to the Bay Area for high school because I felt very alienated and didn't belong in that town. Let's see, I ended up going to high school and college in the Bay Area, and then I moved to New Mexico after that, and I actually met my partner there. And I did New Mexico before grad school just because I really wanted to experience being out in the field rather than just staying in academia.
Right.
So I did some community organizing and youth mentorship in New Mexico, and then I went to graduate school. And it brought me to the East Coast, and I ended up staying on the East Coast for about 20 years, mostly Boston, New York City, upstate New York. And for me, that was such a wonderful experience because it was a place I had not known. It was something strange, and I got to learn so much about the culture, the people, the communities, and I still consider myself a mass hole, actually.
Really?
But I miss it terribly. I do not miss the winters. I will very much say that. And
I love direct attitudes. That's what I like about it.
Yes, direct communication is so key. I don't. You could be nice to some degree, but let's be direct. I really, really appreciate that. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Masshole being a Massachusetts butthead.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had a chance to live in New York for a year, and I had previously done some summer programs for educational empowerment for youth in New Jersey.
Awesome.
So I had some experience out there, and as a person who grew up in Eugene, Springfield, it was definitely different. But one of the things I would say is I had a homie who is a Mexican American, and he's mixed, and he's my best friend Brian. People who know me know that he's my best friend, and he got to go to DC in 8th grade, which was really exciting. But other than that, he'd never been to the East Coast, and I was a grad student at Columbia at the time, and I unfortunately had a class at the time. I was going to fly him out to do, we're on a talk show right now. I found out because you get free tickets to things, and David Letterman was doing his show. It's called My Next Guest Needs No Introduction on Netflix.
Neat.
So I got free tickets, and then I flew him out, and I got Brian to come.
So cool.
It was super exciting, And he, as a mixed person, often people will think he presents as sort of South Asian or Indian looking.
Yes.
But everybody kind of was like, you get that face that people make. And, this is a long-winded tangent, but
no, this
open
is awesome.
conversation, right?
I like it.
At the time that he arrived from at LaGuardia, I was in class, and I had intended to be able to go meet him at the rail station closest to LaGuardia, or even at the airport itself.
Yep.
However, I had failed to work that out with my calendar, so I was in class. So he had to get on, 3 trains to get to Upper Manhattan where I was. Yep. And there were 2 things about it. One very positive, one very negative. The negative was everybody's just running by me.
Fast.
The pace of movement is so dramatically different than North Eugene, where we grew up.
Yeah.
So that was really intense and kind of frightening and disorienting for him.
Yeah.
The other thing he told me, it's really refreshing that no one's just looking at me like I'm the person of color, and
Heck
just
yes.
giving that extra glance or that look of concern or confusion or whatever it may be, because I'm just a person here.
Right.
That's what and that's something that a lot of people growing up here might not ever get to experience from being here, and it can lead to this. Well, we know what it leads to. It's frustrating.
It is.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to share that. And so, but with that experience of living in the Northeast, it sounds like, that some of that culture is continues to drive you.
Definitely.
Today.
It does help that my partner is from the Northeast as well, so he's here with me. He reminds me about my mass holiness. But yeah, no, I'm so grateful for my time there, because I think what people need to do on their journeys, my personal opinion, is to get yourself out of your comfort zones and try something new. And so moving to the East Coast was, strange. I didn't have any family or friends close by, but you make the community what you make of it. Like what you put in, you'll get out. So that's what I really appreciated. And I still adore a lot of my chosen family still out on the Northeast.
Yeah. And then I could connect it to some many Asian cultures to have different expectations around customer service and things like that. So some people will think you go to a Chinese restaurant and maybe they aren't as, attentive to you as some other restaurants would be. Right. And they think that's different and rude potentially. And the reality is, these East Asian cultures tended to be in places where there's a lot of population density, and the idea that everybody's going to give you the same really deep, warm interaction and talk about your kids when you're at the cashier or when you're paying for your pho or whatever is not that way. So that can be a really nice thing about the East Coast is just, people aren't in your business all the time thinking that they're being polite, but
yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah, I miss that. I'm glad to know that you lived out there too. So.
I did, yeah. And then but I had to leave. I just, I love being around here.
Yeah.
That's what it came down to.
Right.
And now I want to learn more about you and what makes you have love for Springfield.
Sure.
And so, connecting from the origin, how did you come out to here?
Yeah. So I got sick of New England winters, and I grew up as a California girl, so I needed to get back to milder weather. But actually, the major driving force was my brother had a child in 2008, and I don't have any children, but I really wanted to be an aunt in person. I didn't want to be an aunt from the East Coast, possibly seeing him once a year. That just wasn't what I wanted to have as a relationship. It's kind of like the relationships I had with my aunts and uncles growing up. I wanted them to be there, and they were always there for me. So that's what brought me here to Oregon. And then, I moved here in 2016, literally the day that Donald Trump was elected.
Oh, wow.
And here I am, kind of cruising around my new home community. And I remember distinctly thinking, where are the people of color? Because I need them right now. And I did find some, which is good, but it took a while. And so when, I came here, I started looking for work, and I got hired by the city of Springfield. And I'm super, super grateful for that, because I feel like they took a chance on me. I've been mostly on the community organizing, social justice sector, and working mostly in nonprofits. Didn't do a lot of public sector work until coming here, actually. And so I am so grateful for Springfield to taking a risk, a chance with me, and investing in me for the last 4 years. And I feel like I gave back, too. I helped work on city planning projects that focused on affordable housing. I got to work on celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day in Springfield, which was a pretty big deal a few years ago. In fact, a lot of tribal council members were like, what? Springfield celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day? That's got to be something. So that was really great to be part of. I became involved in their DEI committee as well. I left. Before I left, I was one of the co-chairs, and we were really trying to infuse equity work in all the city, in all city departments. But now I did leave City of Springfield in September of this year, and I am now working at another municipality. But I really miss Springfield. It's the 4 years that I was here, it's literally made a special place in my heart where I think I'll always be invested. And I think that's why I'm still volunteering with SAFER, even though I'm not working in Springfield or living in Springfield for that matter.
Well, we certainly value all the work that you've done, and I think you're probably able to watch the continuation of some of those seeds that you planted in the municipal government here. It's worth mentioning very briefly that you're obviously not here as a representative of your current position with the other municipality or anything like that. This is a personal discussion. And as part of that discussion, Melissa, I have to push back on something you said because
Please.
I do not think that they would have hired you into that position where you say they take a chance on you unless you had robust, experience.
Thank
and
you.
so for you to believe that, I am seeing so many of my friends and peers who I've heard say they would never hire me or I don't have this or that.
Right.
But what was some of the experience that you had that led them to not only take a chance, but to say we absolutely would love to have this person on board, which is what happened.
Yeah. Can I first just say thank you for pushing back on that? Because I think it's true. Like even today, we look at job descriptions and postings and we're like, oh, I don't meet that, so I'm not going to apply. And we're selling ourselves short. I sold myself short. You're right. And so I think my experience was I was hired for a senior city planner position, and I've never held a city planner position in my career, So that was like, oh, am I an imposter? Is this something I'm going to be completely a novice at? But you know what? The supervisor who hired me, he said, your experience in different sectors and jurisdictions and doing equity work and social justice work can easily be translated to the city of Springfield. And so I think that was him saying that actually helped encourage me to get more involved in that kind of work as well, in addition to the city planning work. But you're right. I think I did bring a lot to the table, and I learned from all my other team members as well. But yeah, I deserve to be there. So thank you.
Right on.
For saying that.
And yes, absolutely. We all in the room agree.
Thank you.
There are deep intersections between urban planning and the ways that white supremacy and racism have proliferated in this country. And I think that when you look at the previous cities that you've lived in, I think that it's a different, dense landscape, et cetera, but you had that value that you brought to the table of just knowledge, personal knowledge of what it's like to navigate a Boston or a New York or, and they're at later stages of development in terms of having a few more decades and centuries of actually building things.
Right.
But we should always be looking to the future when we're here. So can you tell me anything about in Springfield where those intersections have affected your job and where you've considered them or even just thought about, it doesn't have to be about racial justice, but in general, equity, fairness when it comes to city planning?
Sure. That's a great question.
Yeah, I didn't tell you before I was going to ask.
I was like, wait a second, now you made me think. But no, but you're right, urban planning and the intersection. And actually, what got me really into urban planning was learning about the housing injustices, how certain communities were treated unjustly and just oppressed. I mean, we're talking about redlining, certain neighborhoods where certain people could not live or buy.
Denied bank loans.
Exactly. And we live in Oregon. I mean, let's not forget our history where the whole state didn't allow, people of color to own homes or property or land in here, even though they said they would not have any slaves. Yeah, we won't go there.
Yeah, it was they thought they were being magnanimous to say we won't have the race problem, and it was just full exclusion.
Yep.
I think we have an exclusionary view of it's not our problem if it's not in our around us.
Right.
And I had a friend who the other day said something about how, do you think a person who committed this violent act should still be in society or should they be in a prison? And I thought, a prison is part of our society, my friend. It's not you haven't removed is it Audre Lorde or is it
yes.
Prisons do not disappear social problems, they disappear people.
Yes.
That's a different story. That's a different side of things, but
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, but I think the continuation of like the intersection of urban planning and oppression, you talked about planning for the future. You have to look at your past to plan for the future. And a lot of times when people or communities are planning for the future, there's a lot of voices left out. And that, for me, is a passion for me about participatory planning, that we need to get all the stakeholders' voices. And you can't just assume like one person from one group is going to think the same thing as another person in that same group. So it's really about that really targeted outreach and investment in the process to really get into the outcomes. Because I think that's what plays into the injustices today. Some of our voices were never heard in the planning of cities and communities, and therefore we're struggling with that. So include us, and we can be part of the solution. Yeah.
And then with Springfield, there's such a ripe opportunity. Business owners that are here, they're here intentionally. They want to be in Springfield. They value something about Springfield. They will come to the table. Constituent groups of all kinds, students, parents, family members, educators. Everybody that's here tends to want to be involved in the conversation. So it's not as hard to get, that widespread engagement.
You're right. I think there is that. I think I have seen that diversity of folks coming in. But again, I keep thinking about who else's voices are we not connecting with? Do they even hear about this outreach? Is it in their language? Were they at work when they got this? So it's always about making sure, as a community organizer, meeting people where they're at, even though there's some challenges with that comment too. It really is about, hey, if you're there, we need to come see you as well, and not expect you to come always to us.
And then the other thing that people have to realize when they're wanting to do that work, and let's say they're a white ally to the cause of advancing racial justice, is they might have considered every little way in which they want to not re-perpetuate those harms. Right. And they might actually do a very inclusive job of something. And still, the historical experiences that those marginalized groups have had might still be such that, they're still experiencing skepticism or
distrust.
Why would I do this? You said last time that you were going to include, but then you did that.
Exactly.
And so that trust is something that's not going to be rebuilt overnight.
Nope, not at all.
And honestly, as we have this conversation, this is the most, so far, direct conversation about equity, marginalization of any of these, and I think that's totally great. I think hopefully there's people that have committed to watching all these and listening to all these conversations. They might be uncomfortable, from this, and feel free to lean into that. And I encourage you to be willing to continue to listen regardless, because things need to be said and the light needs to be shown on.
And that's how we grow as individuals too. Getting into that uncomfortable spot and growing from there. So, yes, please lean in.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so, how long have you lived in our area here? I need to get that clarified in my head.
So, I moved here to Eugene in November 2016, literally the day Trump was elected. Mm-hmm. Not my favorite day to remember.
Right, okay.
But then, actually, I have been here.
How did it get on your radar, if you don't mind?
About
this
Eugene?
Area, moving here.
Good point. So I didn't know where I wanted to live in Oregon. Originally, it was Portland, but couldn't afford it. And actually, it was too close to my brother. Like, we wanted a little bit of space and healthy space. So we decided we could be at least 2 hours apart. So we checked out some other municipalities and communities in Oregon. And I think what spoke to me here is that I heard there was a Filipino community here, and my mom actually knew somebody who lived here, so she really encouraged me to move here, and I've been glad for the experience. I will also add that my partner is a white man, and he is a deadhead, so he did his research and learned about Eugene and the history of the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey and all that stuff. So that's kind of another factor that brought us here. Yeah. And I live in rural Cottage Grove now. Again, that was an opportunity made from my connections in the social justice world. Feel very, very lucky. But if I had to leave rural Cottage Grove, I would totally come to Springfield. I've really enjoyed being here, working here, and I would love to be a community member, actually. But while I'm in rural Cottage Grove, you had asked me a little bit about my hobbies and talents, and I'm an animal whisperer. I love animals. And so my favorite things to do is hanging out with my animals in our place. We have 6 goats, 20 plus chickens, 2 roosters, 4 house rabbits, 3 dogs, and I'd really like to add a llama into the mix at some point.
Wow.
So that's
Exciting.
really my passion there. And I also love, I shouldn't even say this, I wish I had a green thumb like my parents.
Oh.
But I don't. So
My
I
girlfriend's
focus on the
been getting
animals.
really into it.
Really?
It'll take over.
Nice.
You
Tell her
know?
to come on over. I got plenty of space for her to work on.
She's so excited about it. But nowadays with everything too on social media and stuff,
Yeah.
they like find out what you're interested in and then bombard you with it. She's like,
yes.
everything
Those
in her
ads.
feed is plants, plants, plants. You know, but
That's
it's
great.
lovely.
It is lovely. And to be
Yeah.
surrounded by it, to enjoy it too.
You talked about being an animal whisperer, and I, as somebody who loves, for example, the English language,
Mm-hmm.
I've found so much depth and passion of engaging with humans
Totally.
for my whole life.
Yes.
And then, actually, it's my partner. I'll say her name, Haley. Love you, Haley. She really imbued in me that deeper level of like there's a certain patience that you have to have
Yeah.
to like understand what an animal is feeling. Dogs and cats. I always kind of thought cats were kind of cool, but now I've begun to like dogs more. And she's got this pit bull, Bella, and I just feel like I learned that Bella is the #1 name for a female dog. I didn't even realize. So much to learn, you know, at least in the U.S. And yeah, there's something about now. It's not that it's totally flipped, but
Right.
because I still love humans,
Yes.
right? And I love being able to engage verbally, but I just find that I actually have so much to learn as a fellow mammal or life form, just a fellow participant in this world, just observing how animals are dealing with life, because there's a lot there.
Yeah, totally. We can learn a lot from them. And I also love engaging with humans. I also am an introvert, so I need breaks, which is why I go to
Yes.
the animals. But yeah, it's I learn a lot from them in so many ways. They also center me and ground me, so I stay like more calm, and I actually feel a sense of belonging with my animals too. And you mentioned your partner's pit bull. I also have a pit bull, a pandemic puppy. And speaking of marginalized and just, discrimination, how much pit bulls are discriminated upon too.
Oh, yes.
And so actually
Huge prejudice.
having a pit bull now, I'm experiencing it and trying to combat it. But we all have our work to do.
My husband.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because people sometimes will have a bad negative experience early on with a dog, and then they'll write off dogs.
Yes.
And in this world where we're such separate species from one another, I guess that's a permissible form of discrimination. But should it be, or should we try to
Right.
unpack, why is it okay to then write off all dogs because of something that happened to this dog when that dog probably felt afraid and threatened of you?
Exactly. Yeah, if we can even draw those kind of commonalities and common ground between animals and human and how we treat them, I think there'd be a lot to learn. In fact, actually, I worked with a dog trainer who really, really focuses on her training, not just for the animal, but also for the human. And she infuses social justice terms into her work. So, for example, during a lot of the Black Lives Matters protests, dogs were sicked on protesters, right? And so how are these dogs being used to oppress others? And they don't really have that control. They're being controlled by other humans. So it's just interesting to draw those patterns and really speak to it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Since you brought up those protests in Eugene, Springfield, I was I got to tell you, during the pandemic, I think obviously the lockdown that began in early 2020 had an effect on how much people were excited to engage with that issue, right? Once after Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor were murdered, and then George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen, because so much of the collective sharing of pain and frustration, and also wanting to increase accountability for this BS that's happened for so long. It went from being so much online and everybody being at home, and then people saying we can go out into the streets and go do this. And it happened in such a deep and powerful way. I'll say that I was there, not every night, but a lot of those events. And you know what? one of the things that as someone who's kind of a citizen journalist, I try to be aware of is like, I'll go to an event, I'll be there, I'll see it from beginning to end, and really try to immerse myself in it, and then see how it was reported afterwards.
Oh, heck yes.
And those corporate biases,
Oh, yeah.
and the narrative biases of different publications and groups and sources, and even just people posting to a Facebook group that's like, we're the Tough on Crime Facebook group or something, it comes with such a incredibly skewed. And then I know people are at home getting angry of what they think is happening because a video looks like a certain thing happened.
Right.
And the nuances of this is there's things that happened in those events that I probably wasn't comfortable with, me as just an individual. And that doesn't mean that I would tell people not to act in a certain way, but I would observe and support what I felt needed to be supported. And what I felt needed to be supported was racial justice. What was it like for you going through that experience of 2020?
Yeah, well, I actually...
And Stop Asian Hate as well.
with COVID and everything. And I actually go back, we can go back to Emmett Till if we want to, but I was really involved in the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, back in 2016, 2015.
Trayvon Martin.
Yep, and Eric Garner, all of those were... I just remember my heart hurting so much. And luckily at that time, I was surrounded by people that felt the same way and thought the same way, and we organized together and we joined actions together. I think moving here, including the time, that Trump was in as president, and I shouldn't just blame Trump, it's just the time. That I'm just kind of noting that time. And with COVID happening, I actually didn't participate in any of the actions around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. One, because I wanted to stay safe, because I have some family members who are immunocompromised. But in so doing and not engaging, I felt super isolated. And to the point where I was reaching out to my friends and people not in Oregon, to just say like, hey, I'm going through this. I don't feel like my sense of community that's here to help me kind of deal with these emotions. I think what I did was just kept donating to the Black Lives Matter or the movement for Black Lives and helping other organizations that I really love and support. But to being isolated and not feeling a sense of community to just air our frustration, our anger, our pain. That was hard. And I think what thing was helpful is having a therapist of a color to be there for me. And we met telehealth all the time, and that helped. But yeah, I always sometimes think, I'm like, would I have cared about risking my life or other people's lives if I could just go there and commune with folks that felt the same way? So I go back and forth. I'm glad COVID is kind of not dissipating, but we're getting better at managing it, that I would feel way comfortable in participating in action again. But I didn't at that time, and that played a role. And I also have to say that there's not a lot of people of color who work in the city of Springfield. And I think all my other workplaces, I've always had that community, and I felt even more isolated being here in Springfield as an employee in Springfield and not having someone directly to connect with about it. So
yeah, that's
hard.
I think people just simply cannot understand deeply what it's like to the positive of having a therapist of color, if that's something that the traumas in your life, you just want somebody who has kinship and understands certain things. And I think people also, so many white folks have never really had the experience of walking into a room of 10 plus people, 15, 20, 40, 50 people, and being the only person of color.
Yep.
The only person whose skin color presents in that way. And, it's just, I want to pretend like these issues are not issues anymore, because I know some people want to pretend that, and it's really fun. Bury your head in the sand.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect me, therefore, how much could it really be affecting you? And it's just is something I just, again, have to encourage people to open their minds and be challenged. And let me ask people of all stripes to be open-minded and challenged on some things too. I mean, in the world that we live in today, I would submit to you that people in police officers' uniforms probably every day are doing things that are important and necessary. You know, and I've had positive experiences working to make sure accountability happens for something violent that I saw on the street or whatever it may be. And still, so let me say that for anybody who really believes, you know, law enforcement is extremely important. And then you also have to understand, like, the legacy of policing and where it came from and the history of evolving from slave patrols and how, you know, if you just simply don't reckon with that history and understand that public safety can mean some different things to different people, then we're not having the same conversation. And I want us all to have the same conversation. Part of why I was interested in fighting for justice against police brutality that exists is because I've been a victim of it. And I'm not black, but I've been treated very badly and physically treated badly by at least one police officer before. And so I just felt in that, by participating in that, I felt it was very liberating to be like, yeah, that happened, and other people, that's happening to other people. And we can talk about that. It doesn't mean every police. It was actually a weird thing too. I'm making this all too much about me and ranting.
No, I love it though. It's great. I'm learning about you too.
I would go to these rallies and I would chant along to most things, but once it comes out of my mouth, I feel accountable for it as my words. So all cops are bastards. I usually wouldn't say it because my friend's dad, my old coach, whatever it might be, I know that those people are in many cases doing their best, and so. You know, it was weird to go to an event and be in support, and everyone's kind of like you know, riling you up to be like, thank you for showing up, keep being a part of our movement. It's like, I am a part of your movement, but I might not agree with everything all of the time. And
that's okay.
I believe so. I believe it's okay.
I think we're all very different people with different experiences, and even though we're trying to create a movement of folks for, you know, different issues and different causes, we're all still different people, and we're not all going to agree. And I think that needs to be respected and honored as well. But finding that commonality and where you fight together, that's where the focus should be. Now, speaking about police brutality, this is very interesting because, you know, agreed. Public safety, community safety looks different for different people. I actually wrote my thesis on community policing as an asset to community development. And a lot of police departments might boast that they do community policing, but it's not what I believe is real community policing.
Well, what is community policing?
So, yeah, thank you for asking. So I think community policing, first of all, I don't think I'd actually call it policing. It's really about being that bridge to that community. If there's anyone who's having issues or if they commit a crime, finding out what caused that, finding the root cause, and finding resources and opportunities for that person to move away from that criminal activity to something that is really meeting their needs. So, for example, I worked with a gang, very highly gang-involved youth center in Lowell, Massachusetts. And, man, just how... Okay, I'm like spacing out here. I apologize. No. Something about the police and how they engaged with, you know, they think that they were doing community policing, but I witnessed how aggressively rude and discriminatory they were to many of our teens of color. And I had to fight back, you know, and trying to collect badge IDs and complaints. And, you know, there's also these forces fighting against you and holding police accountable, too. So that was frustrating. But as a community organizer, I think community organizers make the best community police officers because you're about making those connections and building those relationships. And it's not about just the laws and black and white rules, you know, regulations and stuff. It's really about being part of the community, not policing the community. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. One problem, you know, the movement. Some people say, what did it articulate? Well, if you live listening, it articulated a lot of things, and one of them was that it's a problem that a lot of officers don't live in or around the communities that they are responsible for in their jobs.
Right.
And that is something that, everybody is susceptible to unconscious bias.
Definitely.
To give a little bit of sympathy to police officers, people think of unconscious bias, and I think they immediately think of police officers now. Everybody's got unconscious bias. We should all unpack it.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
I have unconscious bias of what our conversation is going to be like before we start it. And then it goes in a direction, and I think, okay, that's great,
Yep.
And it's just something that we have to unpack and unravel, and the only way I think to do it is listening to each other.
Yeah.
And so I'll try not to talk more than I already have. I just don't know where to,
We've been all over the place.
We have, and it's beautiful. And so SAFER is something where Springfield Alliance for Equity and Respect.
Yes.
And they have a decades-long history.
Yeah, 25 years anniversary today. They're a group, a project under CALC, which is Community Alliance of Lane County.
They're hiring. CALC is hiring.
Yes, that is true. Yes, indeed. And it's a good organization. So Springfield Alliance for Equity and Respect, I realize we're the grassroots community organizing crew in Springfield. So I needed to connect with them. I shared with them that I was a community organizer as well. And we really tried to figure out how to collaborate while me being inside the city as a staff person, and then them as representing, a lot of the progressive community members who deals with a lot of resistance. And there's, people have called SAFER out for certain things. Maybe they're not as diverse, but the work that they're focusing on, the values that they're focusing on, align with mine. And for me, that is enough of a reason to get involved. And if I could be instrumental in bringing more people to the table and joining this movement and making Springfield even a better and more welcoming place, I'm there. I'm in it.
Heck yeah. And white people who want to work towards racial justice in a world where everybody's safe and valued,
yes,
there's totally a place for you. I hope that my participation as a person who believes in these causes, as an activist, never tells somebody that they have no place.
Yeah.
It might mean saying, in this room or in this conversation, we've heard a lot from you.
Right.
Sometimes,
right.
'cause people of all races and groups, sometimes they get talkative, and sometimes people need encouragement to talk.
Yes.
So just self-reflection is such an important thing,
Definitely.
All the conversations we've had for the Illumination series, I felt, have been with people who are really willing to introspect.
Yes.
That is something that probably ties into their willingness to do an interview. But everybody should be able to introspect.
Yeah.
And there's just such an importance to balance of your own ego and your own self-reflection, because everybody, I believe, should be confident too. I mean, I can't tell everybody how to live their lives, but some people think, Thomas, why are you such big-headed? And it's like, well, I want to be confident because I want to model it for other people from my community, and for other people who are looking at role models. We're all looking at each other to see how we do this existence, this living thing anyway.
Totally. I agree 100% on that.
Yeah, and so SAFER goes back to, they actually were involved with, not going back, but the ICE contract?
So Springfield Police used to have a contract with ICE, and they were up for renewal maybe in 2017, 2018. And SAFER was one of those instrumental groups that rallied a lot of the immigrant community and immigrant activist community to really speak out at city council meetings. And I believe there was actually several city council meetings where the room was full, and there was not even enough time for everyone to speak. So they'd have to have a continuation. But in the end, I think because the council was hearing directly from folks who were affected and impacted, and that was a big lift because a lot of folks, only spoke Spanish or a different language, so there had to be translation as well. It worked. I think some of the counselors were more curious and they wanted to learn more and met with SAFER organizers to kind of understand that more. And he or she voted against the contract renewal. So, that is just one example of the work that they've done, specifically in the Latinx community. But I'm Asian. We're also immigrants too, and I think that sometimes is forgotten, that because there's a large Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx community in the U.S. and is focused as the immigrants, sometimes Asian immigrants get kind of forgotten, or other immigrants from other countries. So for me, just hearing that Safer did that and the city agreed to not renew that contract was powerful and inspiring. And I think after I heard that, I was like, I want to continue that work that they've started here. And then they're still doing.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You brought up being Asian. Asian is such a big loaded word, you know. Am I Asian? I think so. And you know, the long and short of it is that racial constructions are socially constructed,
Totally.
right? But they have real life implications on how people navigate the world and navigate pain and frustration and community and all these things.
Sure.
But I've told you that I don't know that much about what it is to be Filipino or Filipina. And so I want to know about that.
Sure. And I'm glad you're asking that. And I should also share, this is kind of a journey for myself too. You know, my parents were young immigrants, and I think they were really focused on assimilating us when we were growing up. And I mean, to this point, I used to say my last name was Cariño instead of Cariño, when the Cariño is the correct version of my last name, but because it was Americanized, we said Cariño. So there was a lot of that internalized oppression stuff going on for me as I was growing up. And I think it wasn't until I actually moved to New Mexico, where I was not surrounded by any Filipinos, where people thought, hey, where are the Philippines? Is that in South America? I'm like, oh my gosh, look at a map, people. Like, so for me, that was like, whoa, you know, I was surrounded by a lot of Filipinos in the Bay Area, but now not being there, I felt extremely isolated and alone. And it made me realize how much I had it good being surrounded by my community. So I got homesick. And then I moved to Boston, where, you know, a lot of the Filipino community is spread out. And so it's, again, feeling that isolation. And I think for me, being not connected to my Filipino community caused me to want to connect with it even more. So just in 2015, I joined an indigenous tribal tour of Mindanao, which is the southern island of the Philippines. It's mostly Muslim. In fact, a lot of Filipinos are actually scared to go there. When I said I was going there,
Wow.
Family members were like, are you sure? You're going to get kidnapped? You know?
Wow.
And for me, it was about like, this is part of your country. This is part of our country. These are part of our people and our history. Let's go learn about them. And yes, there was times when it was uncomfortable. I can't even speak the Filipino language or the slang. I just never learned it. And that was uncomfortable for me, because if you showed yourself as being from another country, you were more at risk when you're in there. But for me, connecting with the indigenous tribes I don't know, it just felt like this intense kind of connection and of my roots, but also the fact that we've always been here. These are my ancestors, you know? So I think, I don't know if I'm really answering your question about Filipinos, but I think for me, I've really realized how important it is to connect with my culture, to consider myself Pinay. I am now trying to study Tagalog, which is the national language. My parents speak another dialect, which I'm going to start learning eventually too, while I'm still trying to speak Spanish in my workplace. So, you know, It's interesting. But being Filipino, I don't know. I think one thing that I really love is when you're out just somewhere, anywhere, and you think that person's Filipino. You start looking at each other. Keep eyeing each other. Then you might say like, hey, are you Filipino? And then all of a sudden you say yes, and it's like, we're family. I mean, I don't know what their values or politics are, but that sense of just like, hey, I see you, I see me and you, let's hang out, you know? And I think that's always been something I've loved. And then, of course, the food.
Yes, I was wanting to get there.
Yes, indeed. It's always about the food. And may I say, Manila Restaurant is in Springfield, and it's delicious. They actually cook like my mom cooks. I love my mom's cooking, and so she always gives me stuff to freeze when I come back to visit or come back from visiting her. Mm-hmm. Apparently, I don't like to cook, but I love to eat, and I can clean. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's a lot.
What should I order there? I was thinking about going tonight.
Ooh, I really like their Bicol Express.
Okay.
Yes, that's really good.
Okay.
So, do you like a little spicy?
Yes.
So yeah,
I
that's
do.
it. Yeah, and the food I've noticed. Of course, lumpia.
Lumpia.
But a lot of the things is what I've noticed about Filipino cuisine is there's not a lot of spiciness. It's more sweet. Have you? I don't know if that's. At least that's what I've noticed. And
Or both, sweet with the spicy.
yes, and that's always the best combination. But yeah,
Mi
food is-
goreng, is that a Filipino dish?
goreng,
No, that's
I think
Thai.
I think it's Thai.
Thai, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Apologies. See, my own ignorance is on display.
Good food too.
Recorded forever. 'Cause
Good
I'm not,
food too. Yes. I used to waitress at a Thai restaurant, and one of the best things was that they fed all their employees before each shift and after each shift, and their food was amazing. And I gained about 10 pounds. So
Nice.
hey.
But there are Filipino noodle dishes.
Yes.
I think that the
Pancit.
noodle might be the number one uniting force in the world.
I agree. Oh wow, I love it.
Ramen,
Yep.
fettuccine,
Yes.
like everything, every kind of noodle.
Yes, and it's interesting. Pancit is eaten usually on people's birthdays because it's long. It means long life. So
Okay.
yes, that's a little culture. I grew up Catholic. I'm a surviving Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic, perhaps that, yes.
We've had such different conversations about faith. It's really wonderful
Yeah.
to see the different perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I mean, I think a lot of times Filipinos don't necessarily connect with other Asians as much because, one, we were colonized by Spain. It's a different thing. We were colonized by the United States. Japanese, Germans, Portuguese, all these different things. And where was I going with that? Sorry.
Just different experiences of Filipino, maybe not quite.
Oh yeah, not feeling. There's even a Facebook group called the Latinos of Asia, and they're talking about Filipinos, which at the same time makes me feel a little weird because I'm like, why are we separating ourselves from other Asians and Pacific Islanders? That's where we are. So even making that connection to my identity is really important. Catholicism, a lot of Latin communities and ethnicities grew up Catholic, as well. So there's a lot of those commonalities. But I, for one, it was great. My parents said, hey, we want you to choose your own religion and decide on it. And when I decided to say, hey, I'm not choosing a religion, I like all faiths, I'm loving to learn it and be spiritual. And my mom was okay about it. My dad was very sad and disappointed
Really?
because he grew up very heavily Catholic, and he still considers himself a Catholic. So, there's that element in the Filipino community as well. What else can I say?
Well,
yeah.
I can understand the thing that, like, you have your kid and you envision that they're going to be Catholic, and
Yes.
you believe that Catholicism is like, insert
Something.
what you believe here. I'm not going to say what you believe about it.
Right.
But I think communities in general are especially robust and strong when it's people who have deeply chosen for themselves to be
Yes.
part of it.
Yes, indeed. For sure.
You can have some walls that kind of keep people in that might kind of want to leave, but just tear down the walls and let people be where they are. And then when they actually are there together still,
Yes.
that's beauty.
Yeah. I have to say that, in high school, I actually took a major religions class, and whatever faith you are out there, I really encourage you to start learning about other faiths, because that's, I think, what got me interested, is that all these faiths have different things about it that I really love and appreciate, and I can't just limit myself to one. And everyone's practice is different, so I recommend that's another way of learning about other people's cultures. Faith is a big part of culture.
I went to college in Minnesota, and I had a
Cold
global
weather.
religions in Minnesota class, and my project I chose to do was on Jainism. Jainism.
I have heard of that one, yes.
And they have basically one Jain place of worship in the whole state of Minnesota, and it actually is part of a Hindu temple.
Huh.
And one thing that I could get into one of the main things people know about them is they're very serious about not harming life. So they try not to harm insects and things like that.
Very cool.
And I got this gentleman, Ram Gada, I was really appreciative of. And thank you, Ram Gada. I'll always remember what I learned about Jainism from that.
Neat.
But one story that comes to mind is a story of a rural community of people coming together, very Springfieldy in a way, is that unfortunately there were these two young gentlemen who had whatever beliefs they had, decided to smash up a bunch of statues at the Hindu temple where the Jain Center was.
Jeez.
And this is something actually prior to becoming a U.S. Senator, Amy Klobuchar sort of took the case in order to create like a peaceful resolution for what would happen. And the church asked for these young gentlemen to be involved with community service.
That's cool.
And to understand what they did was deeply hurtful, and their apology was what they learned from it was profound.
Yes.
And it wasn't all about lock these people up. They're doomed to be troublemakers forever.
Right.
It was the Hindu and Jain community coming together in the area and saying what we believe is this is a learning opportunity.
Yes.
And I don't know what happened with the statues, whether they're repaired or replaced.
Right.
Honestly, I don't know. But I'm sure you could look it up. I think it's near, I don't remember where. But it's a powerful story, and it's about human redemption and overcoming these boundaries between one another, religions, races, cultures.
And I actually draw the connection of the social justice movement about calling out versus calling in. I see what those folks did with the people who smashed the statues. They called them in. They didn't say, like, you're done, we don't want to see you, we don't want to deal with you. They invited them in. And I think that is really something special and important in this work, in social justice work and equity work.
And most people that would do something to destroy another person's, something that's significant to another person, again, it comes back to that, whether we talked about in the community policing topic,
right?
Look at what's really going on and look at the underlying cause, because, and some people are fiscally conservative, it's usually better to solve the root cause than try to come back on the back end and keep addressing something that
it's just putting a Band-Aid on something, right? And then it's going to come off. So dealing with the root cause is very important.
Absolutely. Some of our conversations have been with people who have been in Springfield for a long time, like decades or generations. And then I also get the benefit of knowing somebody like you who has been in different places and then chose to be here and chose to be in this area, Lane County, in this community. So one thing I often like to parse out is like the evolution of the community or what it's been like to be Asian in this community over time.
Yeah.
And I still am curious for you about that. Just maybe it's redundant or something, but just over time, your experience in this, let's say in Springfield, did you have an expectation it was going to be a certain way, and then you show up and it was just like that, or was it different? Yeah,
that's a really good question. I mean, in the 4 years that I've been here, it's been 6 years actually since I've been living here. I think I don't feel as unsafe anymore. I think it's been. I said not as unsafe. I still feel unsafe at times. But I think it's been about connecting with other folks in the community, specifically people of color, where we would exchange and share our common feelings and frustrations. So for me, that evolution of just connecting with community helps retain me and sustain me here. I would say in the first 2 years, I questioned whether I was going to stay here. But until I started meeting folks and connecting with people, I'm invested, And I think that's, I appreciate those who've been here before me and for many, many years and decades. I can only imagine the challenges that they've experienced back then if I'm experiencing this now, But again, it comes back to just connecting with folks and making your community, finding your community and feeling that sense of belonging. And I think for me, I've been very grateful for the people I've met here because they have made me feel belonging. And so.
That's wonderful.
I'm grateful for that.
I hope that's been true of your experience of city staff, good relationships there, and just people in general throughout the community. And one thing you said was like something about previous generations and what they had to endure. It makes me think that we do get caught up sometimes. I don't accuse you of doing this at all. This idea that positive social change has an inevitability to it. It's just going to happen. Like, the arc of justice is long. And I love that quote, MLK, but it bends towards justice. It bends that way because people are pulling with their might to bend it that way. It has to. And so thank you for being involved.
My pleasure.
In order to make sure that the future of Springfield, which is something I try to ask people about, is one that can continually be better than it's been.
Definitely.
What gives you hope about this future of Springfield and this community in general?
I feel like there is.
Or I shouldn't even make you talk about hope. How do you feel about the future of it, I guess?
I have a lots of hope.
Good.
There you go.
Good.
No, I've seen even just the minute changes or like very slow changes since when I was working here gives me so much hope. And that knowing that there are people who are invested and passionate about this as well, not just people of color in Springfield, from different agencies. You know, I've worked with people with SUB, Willamette Lane, the school district. And I also have to say, I really actually miss working in Springfield. My team members and, city staff are amazing. So again, knowing those folks and knowing that they're here and that I'm going to still be here too, gives me a lot of hope and makes me, I hear a lot of folks, a lot of people of color come to this area and check it out. Maybe they come here for school, but a lot of times they don't stay. I want to change that. I want more people to stay and make our community more and more diverse and equitable and people I can connect with. I want to find my chosen fam here.
I have had a lot of friends, people of color and white people and all sorts of people that keep living here, homie. Like, what are you doing? Like, I get that university is prestigious, and we have good universities here too.
Yep.
And I do think that this is a place where I can understand a lot of the concerns. But one of the things that I have put to push back against, people think there's nothing to do here. People think it's boring. I just don't think that's true. I get that, a Seattle or a San Fran or a New York or Chicago.
Yeah, we've lived in those bigger cities.
I get it. One of the things, actually, though, just briefly, in New York, because I was broke as a joke, right? I was a grad student on scholarship and lucky to even be able to be anywhere near that area economically. I'll just be honest. And this thing, I was going through a hard time at the time in general, so I would deal with negative self-talk.
Yes.
And I felt that New York as a city had a way of making me feel if I had a boring or a bad day or a slow day or a day that just didn't feel fun, it was my fault. It was my fault.
Interesting.
Because there's so much to do.
Yes.
I can't blame anyone else.
Right.
And that's just something that I felt. And here there's just actually is a lot of fun stuff to do, and as someone who cares about the performing arts community, I'm very involved with the Wow Hall in Eugene, but also Wildish Theater here in Main Street.
I want to see you perform, by the way.
Do you?
Great things. Yes, I do.
No, I love performing.
Excellent.
That's something that it's like I get it. I totally get it, especially when there's certain you go to a bigger city, there's certain niche groups or cultural groups, for example. Yeah. That I can understand. But I'm fully on board with you in terms of wanting to make this somewhere that's really viable to live for families and raise your kids and working class people.
Right.
And that's something that also goes into economic development, making sure there's enough good wage jobs in this community.
To sustain folks, for sure.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Likewise.
Is there anything because this is about you, any area of life or your journey or your story that you feel we have yet to touch on that you would like to get into?
I think we touched upon a lot, and I really appreciate this conversation because it made me go introspective as well in many topics. So, no, I just appreciate having this opportunity to be interviewed, and thank you all for the organizers and the Illumination event. I'm excited to see it come through.
As am I. I'm really grateful to be working with our photographer, Mimi Noyeto, our consultant, Amy Yogi. And we want to thank you as well. Hopefully if you've watched all of these or listened to all these, you feel well thanked, because I try to thank you at the end of all of them. You made it this far. You care about this community and what these, Asian Americans, AAPI, folks have to say around here. So thank you for that. And thank you very much, Melissa Cariño, for being here. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sweet.